The snow had started falling before noon, the kind that didn't rush but drifted. Soft, slow, deliberate. I remember thinking how perfect it was for the weekend we had planned. A simple birthday gathering for Alina's mother, Mireille. We'd stayed at her house before. It had charm, creaky floorboards, the smell of old books in the hallway, the fireplace that smoked just enough to make it feel like a scene out of a forgotten holiday movie. Alina had been humming in the kitchen when I left, tied into a soft gray sweater that always made her eyes look brighter. "You get the groceries. I'll prep the house," she said with a kiss on my cheek and a list she'd handwritten in pink ink. Almond milk, wine, rosemary, 2 dozen eggs. Nothing unusual. Nothing that hinted at what would come. The store wasn't crowded. I made my way through the aisles with quiet efficiency, humming along to the faint overhead music, ticking things off the list like I always did. This was something we did well together. I thought, shared rhythms, domestic flow, knowing each other's steps. Or so I believed. The garage was warm when I pulled in, the bag swaying from my arms as I balanced the door open with my shoulder. Mireille's house had that split-level layout, a flight of steps leading from the garage to the kitchen, where voices carried down without effort. I was halfway up, the edge of the step biting into my shin, when I heard her. "Why aren't you pregnant yet?" Mireille's voice was smooth, polite even, but with that dangerous undercurrent mothers sometimes wore like pearls. Alina didn't hesitate. "I'm not ready to close doors. What if someone better comes along?" The words hit me so hard I forgot to breathe. Not screamed, not whispered, just spoken with brutal calm. The kind of sentence people said when they believed no one was listening. The kind of truth that only escaped when it felt safe. Everything inside me slowed. My heartbeat, my thoughts, even the twitch of my fingers gripping the plastic bags. The eggs would be crushed, I realized absently, but I couldn't move. Couldn't finish the stairs. Couldn't decide whether to walk in and demand context or walk away and never look back. Someone better. I thought of our apartment. The pictures we'd framed together. The late-night pasta recipes, the shared playlists, the fights about nothing, the quiet makeups, the plans, my God, the plans. Weekend trips and concert tickets, nursery ideas, even names we'd tossed around after a few too many glasses of wine. Was it all just a placeholder for her? Was I the safe harbor while she waited for a better storm? My feet made the decision before my mouth could. I stepped back down the stairs, each motion careful, robotic, like I was moving underwater. I placed the grocery bags neatly by the bottom step. The brown one had ripped slightly too many cans. I adjusted it anyway. Then I pulled my key ring out of my jacket pocket, slid the house key off with a slow, deliberate twist, and placed it gently on top of the bag with the rosemary sticking out. That was the last thing I ever gave her. I walked out without making a sound. The snow had started piling up on the windshield, but I didn't bother clearing it. I just got in the car, turned the heater on full blast, and backed out of the driveway like a man escaping something holy. My phone buzzed once in my coat pocket. Probably Alina asking about the wine. I didn't check. I couldn't. Not yet. The road stretched out ahead of me like a question I hadn't yet formed. I didn't know where I was going. A part of me expected to feel rage or heartbreak or betrayal clawing at my throat. But all I felt was an eerie quiet, like the moment between lightning and thunder. She didn't know I'd heard her. That made it worse, somehow. It wasn't a confession made in a fight. It wasn't a moment of spite or cruelty. It was her truth, spoken easily, confidently, as if she had every right to be weighing the market of men while I carried in bags of groceries and dreams. As I merged onto the road, snowflakes blurring against the windshield, I tried to replay it, tried to soften it, tried to twist her words into something forgivable. Maybe she meant something else. Maybe she didn't mean better. Maybe she meant different. But my gut didn't buy any of it. You can always tell when someone has stopped choosing you. It wasn't just the sentence. It was the ease, the calm in her voice. Someone better. That night, I checked into a hotel off Sycamore Street. Not because it was the best option, but because it was the first one I saw. The lobby smelled like cinnamon and disinfectant. The front desk clerk didn't ask questions. She handed me a room key like she knew I was running from something. I took the elevator up to the 3rd floor and sat on the bed without turning on the light. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even drink. I just sat there, letting the silence stretch out until it felt like a second skin. I could have walked in and asked her to explain. I could have confronted her, waited until she saw my face and realized what she'd done. But there was no need. The sentence didn't need context. It was already complete. She wasn't ready to close doors. So I did it for her. And somehow, that was the clearest moment I'd had in years. The morning after I walked out of Mireille's house, the sun was hiding behind thick clouds, and even the city seemed quieter than usual. I sat in the small hotel room, staring at the plastic-wrapped glass by the bathroom sink, as if it might tell me what to do next. My phone had rung 3 times overnight. The 4th time, I finally looked at the screen. Alina. Of course. The first message came in at 11:42 p.m. Where are you? The second, just after midnight. Noah, this isn't funny. Are you okay? Then, why did you just leave? For the first time in our 3 years together, I didn't reply with instinct or obligation. I sat there, heart steady, not avoiding a fight but simply unwilling to enter one. I wasn't angry, not yet. I wasn't even grieving. It was something stranger. I felt like I'd stepped outside of myself, like I was watching a life I used to belong to play out in a place I could no longer touch. I waited until morning, then typed the only words I could offer. I heard what you said to your mother. We're done. I'll collect my things next week when you're not home. I read it 3 times before hitting send. It was cold, maybe, but it was also honest. And I wasn't going to dilute the truth with punctuation that didn't belong. No, I'm sorry. No, please understand. Just a clear break. Just the kind of clarity she had given me without knowing. After I sent the message, I turned off my phone and placed it on the nightstand like it was radioactive. The silence that followed wasn't painful. It was clean. Sharp, yes, but clean. Like stitching after a deep cut. Like something necessary. I took a long shower. Not because I was trying to wash anything away, but because I needed time to stand still. I let the water beat against my back until my fingers wrinkled. I didn't cry. I didn't talk to myself. I just breathed, counted seconds, and focused on the simple fact that I had made a decision. We weren't going to talk this through. There wouldn't be a fight, or a long unraveling of accusations and apologies. There wouldn't be one of those half-hearted reconciliations you start doubting the minute they happen. No, I had walked out in silence, and now I would finish the goodbye the same way. Later, I went for a walk downtown, just to get out of the room. I passed a coffee shop where we'd once sat and made plans for a summer road trip. I crossed a bookstore we'd wandered through after a brunch one rainy Sunday. But now the memories felt oddly muted. Like they belonged to a version of myself that no longer existed. The world was still turning, but I wasn't standing in the same place anymore. People always talk about breakups like they're loud, screaming, slamming doors, dramatic exits. But sometimes they're just quiet. A realization. A pause. A breath. One moment you're in it, and the next, you're looking at it from the outside, realizing you've already left. At lunch, I sat alone at a corner booth in a diner with bad lighting and decent coffee. I watched an elderly couple share pancakes. No words between them, just glances, forks trading food, napkins passed back and forth. I wondered if they had ever sat through something like this. If they had ever heard someone say something so irreversible that it rewrote the rules of their life. I didn't feel envious, just curious. I thought about our first year. The late-night grocery runs. Alina's laugh when I tried, and failed, to make her mom's lasagna. The way she used to fall asleep with her head on my chest, tracing my collarbone with her fingertip. There had been love. Real, flawed, imperfect love. But now I wondered if I loved her more for who I thought she might become than for who she actually was. It's a brutal thing to admit, when you realize you were the only one planning forever. I didn't check my phone again that day. I didn't need to. I already knew what would be waiting. More texts, more confusion, maybe even a voicemail where her voice would crack just enough to make me question myself. But I didn't want confusion. I didn't want guilt. I wanted peace. And sometimes, peace only comes after the silence. The next morning, I met with a real estate friend, someone I'd helped years ago when they were between jobs. They found me a temporary rental, a furnished one-bedroom not far from my old office. Nothing fancy, but clean, neutral, blank enough for me to breathe. That night, I lay on the unfamiliar couch, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun above me, and thought about how endings are never as explosive as we expect. Sometimes they arrive like a sentence overheard on a staircase. Sometimes they sound like your name spoken by someone who no longer believes in it. Alina's silence followed, then the excuses. When I finally turned my phone back on 2 days later, it was full of them. I didn't mean it like that. My mom pressures me all the time. I was trying to say I'm scared. You misunderstood. But I didn't reply. I didn't want her to clarify or repackage the wound. I didn't want her to make it sound prettier. I'd heard the truth once, pure, unscripted, and that was enough. That was everything. I think that's what people miss when they chase closure. They think it comes from explanations, from dramatic conversations that untangle the pain. But sometimes closure isn't something you get. Sometimes it's something you choose. And I chose it on that staircase. Not when she saw me. Not when she apologized. But the moment I realized I didn't want to stay where I was only tolerated. I wanted to be chosen, not kept. So I packed my peace, took my silence, and left behind a future that had never truly included me. And for the first time in years, I slept. Not perfectly, not without dreams, but without regret. It wasn't in my plan to call Elise. In fact, I had no plan at all. I hadn't thought that far ahead. I was living in reaction mode, hour by hour, not day by day. I had told Alina I'd come back when she wasn't home to collect my things. But beyond that, everything else was just a haze I walked through like smoke. I wasn't dodging pain. I was just choosing not to carry it everywhere I went. Still, I needed to know exactly when the house would be empty. I didn't want to see her. I didn't want a confrontation at the threshold, or some teary apology twisted into a plea for understanding. I wanted clean air. Entry, exit, nothing more. That's when I remembered Elise. Elise, with her quiet presence at holidays. Elise, who never said much at dinner but always offered to do the dishes. The one who brought her own trail mix to family cookouts and rolled her eyes when Alina turned everything into a curated Instagram moment. She and I had never been close, not in any real sense, but there had always been a respect between us. An easiness. I never thought I'd need it. But there I was, sitting on the edge of a new bed in a borrowed apartment, debating whether I should reach out. I stared at her name in my contacts for 5 full minutes before I pressed call. Hello. Her voice was lighter than I remembered. Not surprised, just curious. Hey, it's Noah. I hope this isn't weird. There was a pause. Then, not weird at all. I figured you might call. That surprised me. You did. I heard about the groceries. I let out a small, humorless laugh. Yeah, not my finest exit, but I didn't want a scene. You didn't make a scene, she said gently. She did that all on her own. Her tone didn't carry judgment, just fact. It startled me a little how easily she saw things. No need to dissect or sugarcoat. Just the truth, calmly delivered. I found myself grateful for it in a way I hadn't expected. I need to come by and get my stuff, I said after a moment. I told her I'd do it when she wasn't home, but I don't know her schedule anymore. She's at work Tuesday, Elise said without hesitation. 8 to 6. I can be there, too, if that makes it less awkward. Or safer. Safer. I repeated, surprised. You'd be surprised what people say when they realize they've been left, she replied, then quickly added, not that I think she'd do anything drastic, but you shouldn't be alone in that space. I hadn't realized how much I needed someone to say that until she did. Not because I was afraid of Alina, but because it was the first time someone acknowledged that I didn't have to carry the awkwardness, the tension, the burden of being the one who walked away all by myself. I appreciate that. Really? Elise, I hesitated. She really said things like that before? The kind of thing I overheard? Another pause. Then a sigh. She's always been uncertain. She needs everything to look a certain way, and when it doesn't, she starts narrating her life like she's the only one in it. I always thought you deserved better. The simplicity of her words hit me harder than expected. Deserved better. It was the kind of thing you hear in breakups all the time, but Elise didn't say it like a slogan. She said it like it was something she'd known for a long time and never had a place to say until now. I didn't expect to be here, I admitted. Not like this. Not with her. Not alone. You're not alone, she said. Tuesday. I'll bring coffee. She hung up before I could thank her again. That night, I thought about what it meant to be seen. Not worshipped, not rescued, just seen clearly. Elise didn't offer comfort out of pity. She didn't fill the silence with cheap reassurances. She just acknowledged what was real and offered help. No strings. No subtext. I hadn't felt that in a long time. When Tuesday came, I got to the house a few minutes early. The driveway was empty, which helped settle my nerves. But the moment I stepped into the entryway, something shifted inside me. That house, once familiar, once warm, felt like a set. Furniture still in place, framed memories still clinging to the walls, but everything rang hollow. I moved methodically. Bedroom, closet, drawers. I only took what I came for. Clothes, books, my shaving kit, some chargers. I didn't touch anything we'd bought together. Not the throw pillows, not the antique lamp she once insisted we haul back from Vermont. I left the framed photos, the gifts, the notes. All of it. I didn't want to carry anything that still smelled like her. Elise arrived just as I was zipping the last duffel bag. Still standing, she said softly, offering a paper cup of coffee with a crooked smile. Barely, I replied with a grin that surprised even me. We didn't linger. We locked the door, loaded the car, and drove to a little diner on the edge of town. It was halfway between breakfast and lunch, so we split an omelet and a short stack of pancakes. We talked about simple things, movies, hikes, the smell of coffee beans in the morning. It wasn't forced. It wasn't heavy. It was human. When the check came, I reached for it. Elise placed her hand over mine. My treat. You've had enough taken from you this week. It wasn't the gesture that got me. It was the quiet certainty in her eyes, the way she saw the weight I was carrying and chose, in her own small way, to make it lighter. We didn't talk about Alina after that. Not directly. And that silence wasn't avoidance. It was respect. Elise had shown up. Not for drama. Not to pick sides. Just because she saw someone trying to rebuild himself from the quiet wreckage of a single sentence. And she knew how to sit beside that pain without needing to solve it. As I dropped her off, she looked at me through the car window and said, "People show you who they are in the silence, not the speeches." I nodded, understanding more than I could say. And for the first time since that staircase, I felt like I wasn't sinking anymore. I was beginning. Tuesday came cold and brittle, the kind of day that made your breath feel like glass. I parked across the street from the house Alina and I used to share, well, technically still shared, though by then it felt like a museum curated by someone else. The place looked the same, but it had become unfamiliar, like a skin I'd already shed. I stood in the driveway for a moment, watching the frost climb the edge of the garage door, then took a long breath and opened the trunk. I didn't bring much, just 2 empty duffel bags and 1 cardboard box. I hadn't come to reclaim the past. I came to collect only what belonged to me, the physical things, not the emotional weight. Inside, the house smelled faintly of cinnamon. Alina must have lit one of those seasonal candles she loved. A twisted irony that the sin of comfort could feel so unsettling now. The walls still held the same framed photos, our trip to Asheville, the goofy one from New Year's, her graduation. I didn't look too long. I kept moving. Not out of numbness, but intention. Bedroom first. I went straight to my side of the closet, ignoring the space where her clothes still hung, always arranged by color, by season, by some unseen rule of order I could never quite follow. My suits, jackets, and button-downs came down easily. I folded them without care. They didn't deserve the reverence they once had when we packed together for weddings and weekend getaways. This was functional. Mechanical. I packed only my books from the shelf. No shared novels, no gifts. I left the signed first edition I gave her last Christmas. Let it gather dust or meaning. It wasn't mine to carry anymore. The bathroom was next. Toothbrush. Electric razor. Cologne. I paused at the ceramic soap dish she bought in Portland. I'd hated it. Ugly little thing. But now, even that felt like a ghost. I left it too. I was finishing up in the living room when the door clicked open. I turned, startled, heart leaping, until I saw Elise, standing with a takeaway bag in one hand and 2 coffees in the other. "I figured you might forget to eat," she said, nudging the door shut behind her with her foot. "I also figured you'd be too stubborn to ask for help." I set the last box down and gave a tired smile. "You're not wrong." She handed me a coffee and set the food down on the dining table, our old dining table. Except this time, it was just the 2 of us in a quiet that felt earned rather than strained. "Any damage?" she asked, nodding toward the bags. "No, just detachment." She opened the bag and handed me a wrap. Turkey, avocado, and something spicy. It was warm in my hands, grounding in a way I didn't expect. We sat across from each other, the kind of casual that took MO. "Do you feel different?" she asked between bites. "Lighter," I said after a pause. "But not free yet. You will." There was no pity in her voice. No agenda. Just confidence. She didn't speak like someone trying to fill the silence. She spoke like someone who knew silence had value. We started talking then. Not about Alina, not directly. Instead, we talked about what came before her. My favorite books. Elise's failed attempt at learning the guitar in college. The time she got lost hiking alone in Vermont and ended up in a stranger's cabin who happened to be a retired pastry chef. How she stayed 3 days and learned how to make eclairs. She told it like it was just some quirky detour in a life full of quiet curves. I laughed more during that hour than I had in weeks. Not performative laughter, not the kind you offer to seem okay, but the kind that takes you by surprise. It reminded me I was still a person beneath the break. I studied her when she wasn't looking. She was dressed in a navy sweater, hair tied back loosely, eyes bright despite the weight she must have been carrying too. After all, this wasn't just awkward for me. She was Alina's sister. Blood. History. She was walking a tightrope I hadn't asked her to walk. And yet, she was here sharing lunch with me on a battlefield of old promises and new boundaries. I hope this doesn't make things worse for you, I said softly. Elise shook her head. It's not about worse or better. It's about true. And you didn't do anything wrong, Noah. You just heard the truth. That's not betrayal. That's clarity. I nodded, unsure how to respond to something so gently wise. Besides, she added, if anyone should be uncomfortable, it should be her. Not you. That stayed with me. Not just the words, but the calm certainty behind them. Elise had always been a background character in the story of my relationship with Alina. Now she was anchoring a completely different scene, one I hadn't even known I needed. After we ate, we took one last walk through the house. She helped me double-check the closets, run through the kitchen drawers. She found a pair of socks stuffed behind the dryer. I found a necklace I'd once bought Alina tucked in the back of a drawer, never worn. I left it. As we stood at the front door, Elise looked over at me. You good? I nodded. Yeah, it's done. Not just done, she said. Closed. We stepped outside, the cold biting now, sun dipping low behind the trees. She helped me load the last bag into the car, then stood with her hands tucked into her pockets, watching her breath form little clouds in the air. Lunch was nice, I said. She smiled. It was. Thank you for showing up. She tilted her head. You didn't ask me to. I know, I said. That's why it mattered. We didn't hug. We didn't linger. Just a shared glance, a quiet nod. And then I drove off, watching her in the mirror as she turned back toward the house. Toward the life she was still tethered to, but no longer defined by. The road felt different leaving than it did coming, like it was finally mine again. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was escaping. I felt like I was heading somewhere. Time has a strange way of shifting when your world unravels. The days after I cleared my things from Alina's house felt like walking through fog, soft, thick, oddly soundless. And yet, amidst the blur, Elise's presence remained sharp and steady, like a lighthouse blinking through mist. I hadn't expected her to stay in my life beyond that Tuesday. That's not how breakups usually work, especially not when family is involved. But somehow, the quiet space that opened between us didn't close back up. At first, it was coincidence. A coffee shop on 6th where we both seemed to end up around the same time. A mutual friend's birthday dinner where our names were side by side on the seating chart. Then came the text messages. Simple things like, hey, this reminded me of you with a song link, or are you doing okay today? When the silence at night grew too thick to sleep through, I didn't overthink it. That was the beauty of Elise. She didn't force anything. She didn't pry. She didn't try to replace what had been broken. She just made space. And in that space, something unexpected started to grow. We started hiking together on weekends. She'd show up in her worn trail shoes, a thermos of tea, and that same effortless smile that somehow made the air around her feel easier to breathe. We didn't talk about Alina. Not directly. Instead, we let conversation roam freely. Work, travel dreams, music. We debated which author was most overrated and who made the best pancakes in the city. We walked beside each other, not ahead, not behind, as if we'd been doing it for years. But beneath all of it, something was shifting. Slowly, gently. It wasn't lust. It wasn't distraction. It was something steadier than that. I started to realize that I didn't just look forward to seeing Elise. I needed to. Not because I was broken, but because with her, I didn't have to pretend that I wasn't. Meanwhile, Alina's messages didn't stop. At first they were angry, then pleading, then self-pitying. I didn't mean what I said. You took it out of context. You were supposed to fight for us. It was just one moment. Why throw away everything for one moment? But it wasn't one moment. That sentence, that crack in the dam, had only exposed the truth I'd been pretending not to see for months. Her hesitation, her subtle contempt for the life we were building. She wanted options. She wanted out without saying it outright. She wanted to preserve her image while keeping me on standby. What she hadn't expected was that I'd walk away quietly. Even Mireille, Her mother reached out. One Sunday afternoon, I got a call I didn't recognize and picked it up without thinking. "Noah," she said, "it's Mireille. I wanted to speak to you." I didn't know what I was supposed to say, so I didn't say anything at first. "She's devastated," Mireille continued. "She made a mistake. She said something she didn't mean. You caught her in a bad moment." I exhaled slowly, then said, "She was honest when she thought no one could hear her. That's what I believe." There was silence on the other end. "I didn't raise her to be careless with people," she said eventually, her voice small. I didn't correct her. She wasn't calling for comfort. She was calling because the truth had unsettled her too. Maybe she heard herself in Alina's voice. Maybe not. I never called back. Elise and I bumped into each other again that same week, this time at a bookstore. I had gone in looking for something to take the edge off a restless night. She was already at the poetry section, crouched down, flipping through an old copy of Mary Oliver. "Yes, we both needed a little truth today," she said, not even surprised to see me. "Or distraction," I offered. "Truth is distraction," she replied with a grin. We left the store together, each with a book, and ended up at a corner cafe. It was late afternoon. Rain tapped against the windows. We talked about writing, how some people wield it like a sword, and others like a bandage. Elise said she used to write short stories when she was younger, but stopped somewhere around her second year of college. "Too much pressure to be profound," she said, stirring her coffee slowly. I started to feel like if I didn't say something perfect, it wasn't worth saying at all. I looked at her, really looked, and saw someone who had lived in the background of her own family's drama for years. Someone who had made herself small for the sake of peace. Someone who had mastered stillness because everyone else was so loud. "You should write again," I said. "Not for them. For you." She smiled, soft and unsure. "Maybe." The shift came later that night. She sent me a photo. Her journal, opened, a pen resting across the page. I wrote something. "It's bad, but it's mine." I didn't reply right away. I didn't have to. She knew I was smiling. Weeks passed, and our interactions became rhythm. Morning hikes, bookstore visits, group hangouts where we found each other's eyes across the room like a private language. It wasn't about replacing anything. It was about discovering what had been quietly waiting. Then came the message from Alina I had expected but still felt a jolt reading. "Are you seeing Elise?" I didn't reply right away. I showed it to Elise the next morning as we sat on a bench overlooking a frozen lake. She stared at it, then looked out at the water. She was bound to ask. "She's your sister," I said. "This complicates everything." "It does," she agreed. "But that doesn't make it wrong." We didn't say anything else for a while. Just listened to the wind, the rustle of branches, the crack of ice along the lake's surface. But even in the stillness, I felt something settle between us. Not tension, not fear, but acceptance. Alina had built her life around how things looked. Elise was building hers around how they felt. And me? I was just learning how to live again, with less noise, more truth, and the quiet presence of someone who never once made me question my worth. In that quiet space, something real had begun, not out of revenge, not out of longing, but because sometimes the heart doesn't care about protocol. It only listens when you finally stop explaining yourself to people who never truly saw you. And Elise? She saw me from the beginning. It happened on a Tuesday morning. Clear skies. Crisp air. One of those days that pretends to be warm because of the sunlight, but still makes your breath curl like smoke when you exhale. Elise and I had just finished our usual trail run, 3.5 miles through the park trails we both knew by heart now. We stood at the end of the loop, our hands on our hips, catching our breath in sync. It was the kind of moment I'd learned to cherish. No pressure, no noise, just the comfort of her presence beside me. But that morning, something different swelled in my chest, something I'd been trying to push down, but couldn't anymore. "Elise," I said, before I could talk myself out of it. She turned to me, cheeks flushed from the cold and the run. "Would it be crazy if I asked you to dinner? Like, not as friends?" She didn't answer immediately. Her breath came in soft clouds as she looked at me, eyes narrowing just slightly, not in confusion, but calculation, like she was measuring the weight of what I'd just said. Then, without blinking, she asked, "Are you sure you're not just lonely?" That stopped me for a beat. Not because it wasn't fair, but because it was. I nodded slowly. "I've been lonely, yeah? But that's not why I'm asking." I paused, searching for the words that would make her understand. "When I'm around you, I don't feel like I'm picking up pieces. I feel like I'm not broken anymore. And I don't want to pretend this connection we have is just friendship when it's clearly more. Her mouth parted like she was about to speak, then closed again. She looked down, then back up. It's complicated, she said. I know. But it's not crazy, she added with a soft smile. And yes, I'd like that. We didn't hug or kiss or do anything overly romantic right there in the cold. We just stood there in the quiet of the morning, sharing a look that said everything we weren't ready to speak aloud. We both knew this wasn't going to be easy. Alina's name hung in the background of our every step forward, like an echo waiting to resurface. But sometimes, the truth is more important than the backlash. That Saturday, we had our first real dinner. Not a casual lunch, not a shared muffin on a park bench, but a dinner that we both knew meant something. We met at a small Italian place tucked between a florist and a used record store. Elise wore a dark green dress, the kind that made her look elegant without trying. I hadn't seen her in anything but jeans and jackets before, and the sight of her made something shift in me again, an ache, a hope, a deep recognition of just how far we both come. We talked. We laughed. And unlike every dinner I ever had with Alina, I didn't feel like I was auditioning. I didn't have to earn space at the table or choose my words carefully to avoid offense. Elise listened. She asked questions. She remembered details. And she shared, vulnerably, openly. I used to think I was invisible in my own family, she said over her glass of wine. Alina was always the star. The one with the perfect hair, the ambitious plans, the polished answers. I never hated her for it. I just learned how to stay quiet. It became a habit. But lately, with you, I don't want to disappear anymore. You never were invisible, I said, leaning closer. I just think you were waiting for someone to actually look. That night, we didn't rush into anything physical. We didn't crash into intimacy just because we could. We ended the night with a long walk back to her car and a hug that lingered just a little too long to be innocent. She rested her forehead against my chest for a second, and I wrapped my arms around her like I'd been doing it for years. There was no urgency, only certainty. The next few weeks unfolded in the same quiet rhythm. We weren't flaunting anything, but we weren't hiding either. We saw each other often, sometimes in public, sometimes on her couch, where we watched old movies with shared blankets and mismatched mugs of tea. We talked about music and hiking trails and the best pizza place within 20 miles. And slowly, the distance between us disappeared. But outside of our small cocoon, the tension was building. Alina hadn't found out yet, not officially. But there were signs that the whispers were starting. A cousin made a vague comment on Elise's Instagram. A friend of a friend asked me if the rumors were true. We ignored them at first, but we both knew it was only a matter of time. One afternoon, Elise sat across from me on her balcony, legs curled under her, hair braided loosely over her shoulder. She looked tired. Not of me, just of the storm we both saw forming in the distance. Do you think we're doing something wrong? She asked softly. I shook my head. No, I think we're doing something real. And sometimes, people confuse the two. But she's my sister. I know, I said. And that makes this hard. But it doesn't make it wrong. We didn't plan this. We didn't lie or sneak around. This happened after the end. Not before. And you and I both know there's a difference. She nodded slowly, the wind brushing a few strands of hair across her cheek. I just don't want to be the reason everything falls apart. You're not the reason anything fell apart, I said. She made her choice. And I made mine after hearing it. Elise reached for my hand then, lacing her fingers with mine, grounding herself. So what now? Now, I said, we stop worrying about what everyone else thinks and just keep being honest, with each other, and with ourselves. And so we did. We kept walking forward, not perfectly, not without fear, but with a kind of bravery that came from knowing that what we had wasn't born from betrayal. It was born from something cleaner, truth meeting timing, respect meeting care. That week, I realized something important. Love doesn't always arrive in the way you planned. It doesn't always come wrapped in the person you first chose. Sometimes, it shows up later, unexpectedly, gently, and exactly when you've finally made enough space to recognize it. Elise wasn't my rebound. She wasn't a reaction to the pain. She was the quiet answer to a question I hadn't known I was asking. And this time, I wasn't going to flinch. We had 3 weeks of peace. Quiet mornings filled with shared playlists, trail runs, and slow afternoons spent browsing bookstores or cooking dinner together in Elise's small kitchen. It didn't feel forbidden, it felt deserved. Like the universe had finally handed me something that made sense. But life has a way of balancing moments like that with their opposites. And the storm arrived exactly as we knew it would. Loud, messy, and impossible to ignore. It started with a phone call I didn't answer. Then a voicemail I didn't need to listen to. I knew the tone even before I played it. And finally, a text, the kind that burned through the screen. "You're dating my sister?" My sister. No punctuation, just fury. Raw and unedited. It didn't shock me. What had surprised me was how calm I felt reading it. I took a breath, opened the thread, and typed. "Yes, and it has nothing to do with you anymore." I hit send before I could second-guess the bluntness. Because it was true. Elise wasn't part of some revenge fantasy. She wasn't a placeholder for healing. She was someone I had come to admire and respect on her own terms, separate from the wreckage Alina left behind. I had nothing to apologize for. But Alina didn't want understanding. She wanted a war. Calls came next, 2 in a row, then 3. I didn't answer. The texts escalated. Accusations layered over guilt. "You're sick. You ruined our family. You were always pathetic. Now you're pathetic and desperate. Do you know what you've done to me?" What I'd done. I stood frozen with my phone in hand, reading the venom she poured like wine, and all I could think was how different it felt to be spoken to by someone who once claimed to love me. This wasn't pain. It was control unraveling. She hadn't been rejected. She'd been seen, and that's what hurt her most. I texted Elise that evening. She knows. Elise called right away. Her voice was steady but quiet. "She called me too," she said. "What did she say?" She cried. Then she screamed. Then she called me disgusting. I closed my eyes. "I'm sorry, Elise." "Don't be," she said. "She's trying to make this about her, like she always does. But I won't let her rewrite this story." Her voice cracked a little on that last sentence, and I knew that underneath her strength was a ripple of pain. It didn't matter how justified we felt. Alina was still her sister. There was history. There were memories. They had secrets and sleepovers and fights and holidays stitched into their bones. And now, all of that was beginning to fray. By the weekend, the family had taken sides. Holiday dinners were postponed. A group chat once filled with memes and birthday plans fell silent. Elise's cousin removed her from a shared Spotify playlist. A petty thing, maybe, but in families like theirs, pettiness was just another language. Mireille called again. Elise didn't answer. "I did. She didn't waste time. How could you do this?" "I didn't steal your daughter, Mireille," I said calmly. "She chose me, just like I chose her. And after the way Alina treated me, after what she said, you don't get to ask that question with moral authority." "She made a mistake," she hissed. A sentence spoken in pressure. "No," I said. "It wasn't a mistake. It was honesty. And you can't resent someone for leaving after they finally hear the truth." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You've broken this family apart." And with more sadness than anger, I replied, "No, it was already broken. We just stopped pretending it wasn't." When I hung up, I stared at the wall for a while. Elise arrived 20 minutes later without knocking. She just walked in like she had every right to be there, which she did. "They're going to hate me for a long time," she said, dropping her bag by the door. "Maybe," I said, crossing the room to her. "But not forever. They think I'm selfish." "You're not. I chose something that made me happy, even if it cost me." We didn't go out that night. We stayed in, made grilled cheese and tomato soup, curled under a blanket, and watched a documentary about waterfalls. The kind of night no one writes headlines about. But to us, it meant everything. It meant normalcy, safety, truth without performance. And later, when the lights were low and her head rested against my shoulder, Elise whispered, "I'm scared." I didn't ask of what. I already knew. Scared of being cut off. Scared of regret. Scared of the version of herself she might become if this was all just a beautiful mistake. But I held her hand tighter and said, "Me too. But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you." We slept like that, entwined not by desire, but by understanding. The following week, Elise received a letter in the mail. A real one, in a cream envelope. It was from Alina. 3 pages, handwritten, emotionally choreographed. Apologies laced with guilt, flattery tangled with insult. The final paragraph read, "You may have him now, but he'll always have pieces of me. You're just living in my shadow." Elise read it once, then tore it in half. Not with drama, just with finality. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She folded the pieces neatly and slid them into the recycling bin. "She still thinks love is ownership," Elise murmured. That people can be claimed, not chosen. I kissed her then. For real. Slow, certain, and full of gratitude. Not for what we'd become, but for the fact that she had chosen herself first. We weren't naive. We knew there'd be more fallout. More silence. More people who wouldn't understand how something beautiful could rise from something broken. But we also knew that we weren't building this love on top of someone else's ruin. We were building it from our own ground, honest, scarred, and still soft in the middle. They called it betrayal. We called it freedom. And between us, that was more than enough. By the time December settled in, the world around us looked different. The trees had lost their leaves. Lights shimmered from porches and storefronts, trying their best to make cold feel festive. It was the kind of season that used to make me anxious. Holidays meant obligations, family expectations, schedules to negotiate. But this year, for the first time in years, it was quiet. Just me and Elise, navigating something that felt both fragile and powerful. We didn't make a big declaration about being together. There was no Facebook status, no announcement, no need to make anyone else validate what we had. Our relationship unfolded like music played in the background, constant, comforting, never demanding attention. We went at our pace. We made space where there used to be tension. Our weekends became rituals. Saturdays were for pancakes, always banana, always with too much cinnamon. Sunday mornings were for long walks in silence, fingers laced, breath forming little clouds in the chilled air. She'd bring a thermos of chai. I'd carry the portable speaker and play songs that somehow always fit the mood, even when we didn't speak at all. And it wasn't all bliss. We had our hard days. The kind where Elise would get a text from an aunt reminding her that she was no longer welcome at a New Year's gathering. Or when she'd overhear someone at work whisper that she stole her sister's ex. She carried those things quietly, tucked them under her ribs like bruises no one saw. But she didn't let them define her. I'd catch her sometimes, standing by the window, staring out like she was trying to remember the version of herself that used to belong to the family she lost. I never interrupted those moments. I just walked up behind her and wrapped my arms around her waist until she leaned into me, her body softening like a tired breath. One night, while we were wrapped in blankets on the couch, watching a rerun of a cooking show neither of us actually cared about, Elise turned to me and asked, "Do you think we'll ever be normal again?" I looked at her for a moment, then said, "I don't want normal. I want honest. I want peaceful. I want us." She didn't say anything right away. Just laid her head on my chest and whispered, "Okay." Somewhere in the middle of that stillness, we became more than the aftermath of something broken. We became something new entirely. Not a reaction. Not a rebellion. Just two people deciding every day to choose each other, even when it was inconvenient. And then, out of nowhere, Mary called. Elise had just stepped out to grab dinner, and my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen in weeks. I let it ring once. Twice. My thumb hovered over decline, but something inside me said pick up. "Noah," her voice came, hesitant, worn thin, but not angry. Yes, I wanted to. I wanted to talk. I stayed silent, waiting for the tone, the angle, the purpose. Elise says she's happy. She is, I replied. I didn't think this would be how things ended up. I thought you and Alina. She made her choice. I interrupted gently. I heard what she said. And Elise, she showed up when no one else did. Mireille exhaled slowly. I wasn't calling to argue. That surprised me. I don't understand it, she continued. But I see it. You too. You make sense in a way Alina and you never did. Maybe I didn't want to admit that before. I didn't know what to say. It was the closest thing to a blessing we were going to get from anyone in that family. She's still my daughter, Mireille said. And Elise is still my daughter. And I don't know how to make peace with all of it. But I don't want to lose both of them. That hit me harder than expected. Because in a way, I realized Elise had been losing pieces of herself for years, always deferring to the louder voices in her family. Always choosing the path of least resistance. Until now. Dinner, Mireille said suddenly. Would you and Elise come over? No Alina. No drama. Just a meal. I told her I'd ask Elise. I didn't promise anything. When I hung up, Elise walked through the door carrying Thai takeout and 2 bottles of sparkling water. I watched her move, comfortable, tired, humming softly to herself, and I realized just how much peace she had created in my life, and just how much I wanted to protect that peace. Mary called, I said. She froze for a second. What did she say? She wants to have us over for dinner. Elise blinked, caught off guard. Seriously. No Alina. Just her. She said she doesn't understand us, but she sees it. Elise didn't respond immediately. She sat down on the couch, the bag of takeout still in her lap. I want to say yes, she whispered, but I'm afraid it's a trap. It might be, I said honestly, but it might not be. And maybe it's a way forward. She sat there a moment longer, then nodded. Okay, let's do it. That Saturday, we went. We didn't dress up. We didn't rehearse anything. We just showed up, as we were. Mireille greeted us at the door, her expression careful but not cold. She hugged Elise first, tentatively, and then me. Dinner was awkward at first. Small talk clung to the air like dust. But gradually, something shifted. Mireille asked about our favorite hikes. Elise talked about the poetry class she'd signed up for. I mentioned a new work project. We laughed once, then twice. And when dessert came, Mireille leaned back in her chair and said, "You two really do make sense." That was all she said, but it was enough. Later that night, as Elise and I drove home, she reached across the center console and took my hand. "I didn't think she'd say that," she murmured. She did. Elise smiled to herself. "We're not just surviving anymore." "No," I said, bringing her fingers to my lips. "We're building." And we were. Not loudly, not perfectly, but fully, day by day, decision by decision, turning what once was pain into something that felt suspiciously like hope. Because rewriting the future doesn't always require a grand gesture. Sometimes it starts with a simple dinner and the willingness to be seen, even when it's uncomfortable. It was a Thursday evening when we found out. Elise and I were curled up on the couch, half watching some poorly written romantic comedy, the kind where every line is predictable but still makes you smile. She was sketching something in the little brown notebook she carried everywhere, and I was mindlessly scrolling through my phone, one leg stretched out, the other resting against her thigh. It had become our new version of normal, quiet, warm, effortless. That's when my screen lit up with a message from Mireille. It was a photo. No caption. Just an image. Alina, standing beside a tall guy in a crisp navy suit, holding her left hand up to the camera, her mouth frozen in mid-laugh. A diamond on her finger so large it almost looked cartoonish. The man had his arm wrapped around her waist like he owned her. The background was a rooftop somewhere. I could make out the faint outline of Portland's skyline behind them. I stared at it for a full minute. Elise noticed the shift in my expression and set her notebook down gently. "What is it?" I turned the phone toward her without saying a word. Her eyes scanned the image. She blinked once, then let out the softest exhale. "Well," she said, "there it is." There it was indeed. Alina. Engaged. Smiling. Radiant, even. The kind of photo that people send to relatives to say, "See? I'm fine now. Look what I found." I waited for something in me to twist. Anger, jealousy, bitterness. But nothing came. Just a kind of calm acceptance, like watching a chapter close in a book you'd already put down months ago. "She moved on," I said finally. "Looks like it," Elise murmured, handing the phone back. "Do you think it's real?" I asked. "Or just for show?" She looked at me, her eyes steady. "Does it matter?" I thought about that. Really thought about it. And I realized she was right. It didn't matter. Whether Alina was genuinely happy or just playing a part in a well-filtered fantasy, it had nothing to do with me anymore. I wasn't a supporting character in her story. I was no longer orbiting around her gravitational pull. "She looks happy," I admitted. Elise nodded. "Yeah, she does." I leaned back against the cushions and stared at the ceiling for a moment. "You know what's weird? I don't feel anything." Elise smiled, not mocking, not surprised. "That's not weird. That's healing." I chuckled softly. 3 years with someone, and now I can look at her and feel absolutely nothing. "It means you've finally taken your heart back," she said, resting her head on my shoulder. "And that's the most peaceful kind of revenge." We sat like that for a long while. The movie kept playing, but neither of us was watching. My fingers absent-mindedly traced small circles on her arm. Outside, the wind rustled through the bare trees, and I thought about how strange and beautiful life could be. Alina's engagement photo was more than just an image. It was a final punctuation mark. Proof that the door between us had not only closed but been painted over, the hinges sealed, the knob gone. And the wildest part? I didn't need to knock again. I didn't even want to. Later that week, we had dinner with Mireille again, this time at her place. She made roasted chicken and honey-glazed carrots and even pulled out the fancy dishes she only used on holidays. There was no mention of Alina until dessert, when she handed Elise a folded paper from her coat pocket. "She's getting married in the spring," she said, almost reluctantly. She wanted me to give you this. Elise unfolded the paper. It was a formal invitation. Elegant font. Gold trim. Her name and mine weren't on it. It had been forwarded only because of obligation, not inclusion. She invited me, Elise said, a trace of disbelief in her voice. After everything? She said it's up to you. Mary replied carefully. No pressure. Just a gesture, I think. Elise folded the invitation again and set it aside. I won't be going. Mary didn't argue. She only nodded, slowly, like she'd expected that. The rest of dinner was light, even enjoyable. And for the first time since everything cracked open, I saw a kind of peace in Mary's eyes too. She wasn't thrilled with how things had turned out, but she no longer looked like she was carrying the disappointment like a cross. Maybe she was learning to accept that her daughters had grown up, and that they were choosing paths she hadn't paved. Back at home, Elise kicked off her shoes and slid into bed beside me, curling her body into mine like it was the most natural thing in the world. Do you regret any of this? She asked in the dark. No, I said without hesitation. Do you? She shook her head against my chest. Not even for a second. There was something sacred about that kind of clarity. We hadn't done everything perfectly. We hadn't escaped without bruises. But we had chosen something honest. And that honesty had led us to a place far more stable than the shaky, performative love we'd both once accepted. The dust had settled. Alina had moved on. We had stayed, not clinging to each other out of fear, but walking beside one another out of choice. And when I looked at Elise, her messy hair, the small freckle beneath her left ear, the softness of her laugh even in silence, I realized I had become someone's first choice. For the first time in my life. Not someone to settle for. Not someone to consider until something better comes along. Someone worth choosing. Every single day. That's what healing really looks like, not a dramatic revelation or a burning bridge, but a soft, steady truth. A glance across the room. A quiet Sunday morning. A peace that doesn't need to be proven. And as I fell asleep that night, Elise's hand in mine, I didn't dream of the past. I didn't rewind the old conversations or rewatch the old pain. I dreamt forward for the first time in a long time. Because the dust hadn't just settled. It had cleared. And the view ahead was finally ours. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd walked in 10 seconds later. If I hadn't stopped on that staircase, hadn't heard her mother ask the question, hadn't caught Alina's answer like a blade in my chest. What if I'd carried the groceries all the way up, placed the bags on the counter, kissed her cheek, and never heard what she truly believed? I probably would have unpacked the lettuce, the wine, the rosemary she wrote in looping letters, and continued pretending. I might have married her, built a life on the careful arrangement of her silence. That thought used to scare me. Now, it just humbles me. Because that staircase didn't just end something. It saved me. I didn't know it then. I couldn't have. All I knew in that moment was that everything I thought I understood about love had just fractured beneath my feet. The woman I had chosen wasn't choosing me, not fully, not clearly. She had a contingency plan in her heart, an exit door she refused to close. I was a temporary placeholder in a life she hadn't decided was good enough. I set the groceries down and walked away. That was the first honest thing I had done in months. But here's what I didn't expect. I didn't expect someone else to walk in through that same door I left behind. I didn't expect Elise. I didn't expect kindness without performance, curiosity without judgment. A quiet companionship that grew not because it was convenient, but because it was true. She didn't try to rescue me. She didn't make me forget what hurt. She just showed up, again and again. Until one day, I realized I didn't have to explain myself anymore. I just had to be myself. And she stayed. Now, months later, I walk up new staircases with her beside me, literal ones, figurative ones. We moved into a small townhouse a few weeks ago. Nothing fancy. White brick. Quiet street. A staircase in the center that leads to the second floor, creaky in just one spot. She teased me about that when we first moved in. Said, don't go freezing on this one. You might miss something beautiful again. We laughed. But there was weight beneath the joke. Because that's the thing about moments, they seem small at the time. But some moments open or close entire lifetimes. That staircase wasn't just a passageway. It was a door I didn't know I needed to walk away from. And on the other side of that door wasn't revenge. It wasn't chaos. It wasn't validation. It was peace. Elise brought home tulips last Tuesday. Yellow ones, slightly wilted, because she said they looked like they'd been through something and still showed up. She put them in a chipped ceramic vase we found at a flea market together. I passed by them this morning and stopped without knowing why. They were imperfect, still standing, still lovely, just like us. Sometimes she still gets quiet when someone mentions Alina. I don't rush to fill the silence. I let her sit in it, knowing it's not regret she's feeling. It's grief for what should have been different. For a sister she still loves, even if that love has nowhere left to go. She mourns the idea of what they could have been, but never us. She never questions us. And me? I no longer carry the weight of wondering what I could have done differently. That's the gift Elise gave me without realizing it. The chance to stop rereading the same painful chapter hoping for a different ending. She didn't come in and write over what happened. She just helped me turn the page. Sometimes, people ask how we met. We don't lie. We just don't give them everything. We say we were friends first, that we reconnected after a hard season, which is true. The rest? That's for us. We've started talking about a future that no longer feels like a gamble. Elise wants to start writing again, really writing, not just sketches in a notebook. I'm thinking about proposing a project at work that I've been sitting on for over a year. There's movement again. There's hope. There's the quiet hum of something building instead of breaking. One night, we were out walking and passed a couple arguing on their front porch. We couldn't hear the words, but the tone was familiar, sharp, tired, unraveling. Elise looked over at me and whispered, "Thank you for hearing her that day. I hate that it hurt you, but I'm glad you listened." I nodded, squeezing her hand. I used to wish I hadn't. Now I know it was the most honest moment of my life. Because it was. Not just because it ended something, but because it began something better. Something real. Love isn't always soft. It isn't always fireworks or perfect timing. Sometimes love is what happens when everything else has fallen away. When you've lost enough illusions to see someone clearly. When someone sees you back. And stays. Elise stayed. She didn't step in to be better than Alina. She stepped in simply to be herself. And that was more than enough. Sometimes I still think about Alina's sentence. The one that broke me open. I'm not ready to close doors. What if someone better comes along? At the time, it felt like the end of everything I knew. Now, I realize she was right, just not in the way she meant. Someone better did come along. But he didn't come for her. He came for me. Because I became better. Stronger. Calmer. Clearer. Not in spite of what happened, but because I had the courage to walk away from being someone's second choice. And I found a woman who didn't need to be convinced. Who didn't measure my worth against some invisible future. Who didn't keep doors half open just in case. Elise closed the door behind her when she walked in. And in doing so, she opened another. So now, when I walk up the stairs of our home and hear her humming in the kitchen, or see her dancing barefoot on the tile floor, or feel her curl against me at night without a word, I remember.